McCormick from Windsor County. He is currently testifying in a different committee on another bill. Keeping in mind that this is a live committee meeting on YouTube, I will remind folks who may be stopping in that YouTube enables you to comment any way you normally see fit, but I would ask you to keep in mind that this is a family-oriented production, and we would appreciate comments should they happen to be falling within that frame of mind. We have two folks to join us here today that are going to be introducing themselves, and just so both of you know, we have one member who is new to the legislature. We have three new committee members. And while you may be familiar with the veteran senators, Senator Ingalls certainly is beginning the learning curve, so to speak. So in that theme, we have Gus Seelig, Executive Director of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and Jennifer Holler, Director of Policy and Special Projects with said board. Welcome to you both. I'd like to begin. I don't care which one of you would like to go first, but the upshot is we've been having everybody introduce not only themselves, but what their job description is all about and how you happen to fit into the Capitol bill and why we would be expecting to see you during our conversations when we get that bill into our committee. Gus, I see you're the only one not muted at the moment, so perhaps you'd like to go first?
Well, I'll do an introduction and turn it over to Jen. She's also going to drive our presentation because I need a remedial course in screen sharing. Not my expertise here. So for the record, I'm Gus Seelig. I'm the director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I've known Senator Mazza since this program began back in 1987.
This is where I pause and offer you my condolences, but please go ahead.
Senator Mazza has been a great teacher for me, and I probably have learned more about the Senate from him, and at a very early point than anybody else. And I'm grateful, even when he's been not happy with me, for his directness and in understanding the importance of Senate's protocols and it's how it operates. So it's a long history that I appreciate very much. And he's also been a key booster of a project we funded back in the 90s, where I think he continues to help make meals for the elderly. My background before I got to the Housing and Conservation Board was to work at a community action agency where I was for about 10 years, the last 5 as executive director, and was involved in rural community development there in a number of ways that included both housing and other community development issues. And the frame for the board is that we make long-term, in terms of the Capitol bill, is that we make long-term investments in land and in housing. And in years where the General Assembly feels that they cannot allocate funding to us as fully as they might like in the general fund budget through the property transfer tax, which is by statute our funding source, they have come to your committee and said, because these investments are going to last longer than it takes to repay a bond, and there'll still be value for the public when the payments are done, we think that funding through the capital budget of some of the work we do is very appropriate. And we've probably been in the Capitol bill half of the 33 years that we've been around. About 4 years ago, Representative Shaw also asked us to take on some work related to water quality, which we'll describe briefly when we get into the presentation. But it's, and I guess the last thing I want to say by way of introduction is that our work generally reflects initiatives by your constituents. So I see our role as getting the state's tax dollars back to local communities to do good things that are in their interest. And I think we'll show you some of that work as we make our presentation today. But I also want to invite you, because one of the things I've learned, not just from the members of this committee, but legislators is there's no way that somebody who lives in East Calais can know your communities as well as you do. And so please, when there are initiatives going on in your communities that you think we can be helpful with, make our phones ring, send us emails, connect us with your constituents so that we can help get the resources to them to do the good things that they want to do. So Jen, do you want to introduce yourself as well before we get into the
Sure. Good
slide?
afternoon, everyone. I've had a chance to listen to a couple of your sessions so far this year, and it's really nice how you've invited people to introduce themselves. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. I serve as the policy director for VHCB, so I work across the organizations. A lot of what I do is state and federal legislation that impacts our programs. I also spend a lot of time coordinating, collaborating with other state agencies and other state entities because much of our work complements those. And so maintaining and building those partnerships is a good part of what I do as well. I live in Montpelier, where my family has lived for many generations. I left for a time after college and went to Washington, D.C., where I worked for an offshoot of the National League of Cities. My background's in public administration, specifically in state and local government. Over time, we eventually came back to Vermont. I worked in state government for a time doing community development, and then actually a stint in the private sector working for the firm Downs Racklin Martin in their government affairs team. After a period of that, I was appointed by Governor Shumlin to serve as his housing commissioner within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And there my responsibilities included historic preservation, state housing policy, some federal programs, and also community planning. And then for the last 5 years, I've been privileged to be working with Gus at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And it's I tell our staff that it is truly a privilege and an honor to represent our organization and the work it does to the legislature, basically accounting for where the state dollars go and the results that people should expect from their tax dollars. So that's kind of an overview of where I'm at, and happy to answer any questions about that, or we can begin with a presentation which is designed to say how we fit into the Capitol bill, and then give you a few examples of the kinds of projects that Capitol bill funding in the past has funded.
So Jen, before you commence with that, let me just say, for the benefit of Senator Ingalls, I don't know how much, Russ, you know about this topic, but I will also point out that we have potentially live viewers who may not know anything about this topic. So I'm just going to ask both Jen and Gus to take a half step back and tell us at a 50,000 foot level, what is it exactly that if a legislator had a problem in their community, they could reach out to you for?
Okay, well, so the Housing and Conservation Board is organized as a quasi-public entity, and we receive funding from the legislature, and we also manage federal grants and a tiny bit of philanthropic money. And our mission is to conserve Vermont's landscape for future generations, and to conserve, invest, and develop affordable housing. And we view ourselves as a rural community development entity. And we work with communities on issues of affordable housing, worn out housing that needs to be rehabilitated. We have been involved with the conservation of farmland, with the creation of parkland, both for the state of Vermont and for local communities. We also are involved in rural community development through a number of different initiatives, primarily our Farm and Forest Viability Program, which provides both business planning and technical assistance to farm, food, and forestry businesses, but also operates something called the Rural Economic Development Initiative to help towns under 5,000 access resources for community improvement and community revitalization and economic development. So writ large, we get tax dollars back to local communities to invest in long-term capital projects like building or rehabilitating housing and investing in the working landscape is our primary set of activities.
Okay, thank you for that. And Jen, am I safe in assuming you're going to give us some examples of how that might work? Okay, thanks.
Yes, and our slides will do some more of that framing that you talked about as well. So I'm going to pop it up, and my experience is there's a little bit of a lag sometimes.
Okay,
Oh.
so great. Thank you,
So
Jen.
actually, Denise, you just pulled that up.
Denise is exercising her newfound skills.
Okay. So Denise, so Gus will let you know when to advance the slides then.
Okay. So this first introductory photo is land owned by the Episcopal Diocese of Vermont in Burlington, with miles and miles of trails on it. It has a fair amount of development potential. The diocese needed to raise some money. They've had a big capital campaign, and we also purchased from them a public access easement that provides permanent access to the trails on that land. And we can go on to the next slide, Denise. To frame our work, and I said we do rural community development, the chapter doesn't just tell us to buy and build housing or to conserve land. It tells us to do this because it's of primary importance to both economic vitality and quality of life of the state. When the lodge burned at Mount Ascutney at the ski area closed, the community came to us, and that's the photo you see here, and said they'd seen the example of Kingdom Trails, and they said, we really want to buy this land, add it to our town forest, and begin to utilize this land to attract people to our community for the outdoor recreation economy. And that's what we help them do here. And I think John Ewing, who some of you knew when he was in banking and when he was for a few years in the 90s chair of the environmental board, also served on our board as a citizen for a dozen years. And he was very big on the idea that our landscape could be an economic engine for the state of Vermont, and that we could both conserve but support our economy in a positive way. Let's move on to the next slide, Denise. We work for a citizen board, so it's not just bureaucrats who decide how these dollars are going to be accounted for. 4 members of our board are actually appointed by the General Assembly. The balance of the board is appointed by the governor. Among the people you see here is a farmer representative. That's Hannah Sessions. She's now off the board, and Maria Dead is in her seat. Dave Marvin, who's a principal of Butternut Mountain Farm, is also a member of the board and provides great acumen, business acumen and community acumen, and is very active also as a consulting forester. Let's move on to the next slide. We're in 3 sections of the capital bill at this point. One is for housing, and it used to all be one line item. And about 4 years ago, as the state focused on water quality, it became 3 line items. So one is for housing and conservation projects. One is for, the newest line is for ag and water quality projects, and that covers both retiring farmland from agriculture where it's just not a good place to farm, and to make farm grant improvements. And then land conservation, water quality projects is the 3rd line item in our budget.
Gus, if I could stop you, you said you're involved in 3 items right now, and I think your words were "as yet." Is that kind of a signal that there's something else coming down the pike?
Not from me, no. I didn't mean. We used to be 1. It's been split into 3, beginning with the state focusing about 4 years ago on water quality as a major issue. And the newest line item is this ag water quality projects line item, which was the invention of Representative Shaw both where we do those two things. I do not expect a new initiative. I have heard from the administration that transfer tax revenues are coming in very strongly. And I know that they are looking at the budget. So it's possible, Senator, that we'll actually see a reduction in the ask from the capital bill if we have increased revenue from the transfer tax. But I don't know that. And the administration is working hard to finalize their budget at this point.
Okay, thanks.
So let's go on to the next slide, Denise. Here's an example of the types of projects we're known for. This is the Wilson Block in downtown Springfield. It's across from the movie theater, which we actually helped about 8 years ago. It's the only time we've helped a movie theater, but we've done a lot of buildings with commercial space. There are 8 apartments above the movie theater. There'd been a fire there, and the community really wanted to keep its theater. This building was a wreck. It's been mostly vacant for a decade. The local economic development group has a master lease for all the commercial space on the first floor. It's just been renovated as 20 apartments, mixed income, with a few for homeless youth on one floor, along with somebody who will supervise them. And really viewed in Springfield as a major restoration effort, important to their downtown. And we've done that repeatedly throughout the state. And we'll show you a St. Johnsbury example in a minute that this committee was very involved in. So let's move on to the next slide. This is a project not yet constructed, but that Senator Mazza and I have discussed, and will provide a smart growth location for senior housing in Grand Isle, and really create more of a village center than exists there now. This project is the efforts of a citizens group known as CIDR. They're a local services organization, and they've been looking for a site for about 10 years, maybe longer than that. And they now have the site, they have the plans. We funded it last year. They need an allocation of something called low-income housing tax credits, which I expect they'll be able to get this spring and be under construction this coming summer.
So how did Senator Mazza manage to get that money into his community?
I did not do it. I wish I could
hearing
take
from-
credit for it.
Yeah, he's hearing from the residents, from the folks at CIDR, just saying we need to get the tax credits. We funded this about a year and a half ago. It's a great site for senior housing.
Yeah,
and
no
this-
senior housing in Grand Isle County, Joe.
Well, I'm listening to the date when you managed to get this, trying to figure out whether I was chair when it happened. How it could have gotten by me would have.
I can't take credit for it. I wish I could. I can't.
Okay, thanks.
Let's keep moving. Denise, if we can. I know the committee was very excited about the work you did on the Lamoille Rail Trail last year. This is a little piece of our contribution, not to the trail, but to a resource right adjacent to the trail. We helped Cambridge buy this 5.5 acre site that provides access to the river, provides a place for the bikers to stop and picnic. And it's also part of securing the floodplain and water quality protections. There was a plan, I think, for some of this site to be turned into a gas station, which the community definitely did not want in this location, and just a beautiful place. And I think complements the work you guys did on the rail trail. Let's keep moving along. We talked about grants to farmers through that $1.1 million section of the water quality, for water quality. So this is a farm family along the Missisquoi, and like others, they decided they needed a manure injection system to have better practices and reduce runoff, and increase crop yields. And we provide grants up to $40,000. They generally are matched from a variety of other sources. We didn't bring a long, complex presentation, and I can't remember today whether they were using, which other programs they were using, but we're often partners with either the BMP program at the Agency of Agriculture or the EQIP program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Farmers are also often using their own money as part of match to make these projects happen across the state. Let's go on to the next slide. So here's a couple of others who've benefited from this program. One is a farm in South Hero, where they are raising, and our board actually visited this farm about 4 years ago. And they're doing both pigs and chickens, and we help them with a bedded pack hoop barn. And the Vosburg farm in Swanton got help with manure storage. And in Sheldon, one of the Harrigans received some money for a no-till planter to reduce runoff. So those are the sorts of things that are happening with that $1.1 million line item in your budget. And you will see a report from the Agency of Agriculture that is showing good results from the investments you are making, not just through us, but through your investments in water quality in terms of reducing phosphorus runoff. The line item that talks about land conservation and water quality, one of the beneficiaries is the Marquis Farm in Newport Center. It's a grass-based organic dairy. We helped them in two different ways. One was with the conservation of the farm, but they also got some assistance from us to deal with a problem with a manure pit, with barnyard ditching, et cetera. And the conservation easements also require buffers along streams, and they're right along the Missisquoi. So the state got a special $16 million grant, but it needed state match, and our dollars became part of the state match to bring that grant to Vermont. We were so successful at it and led the nation in getting money out the door that grant was just renewed with a new $10 million grant that we've also pledged match to. So when you think about the benefits of our investments, there's a direct benefit that's going to your constituents, but there's also been this benefit of helping the state access and leverage other federal funds that were highly competitive to get. Let's move on to the next slide. Capital bill appropriations and rural community development. About 5 years ago, Senator Kitchell came to us and said the Northeast Kingdom needs some special help. It was at a time that the EB5 scandal had just broken, and she asked how we'd feel about set aside of funds for the Northeast Kingdom, and we said great. And these two slides will speak to that effort. And what you see here is just under $200,000 that's gone to Newport. And as you all know, it's been a real struggle since the hole in the ground that was going to turn into something else has remained a hole in the ground. I know the folks in Newport don't like to hear it talked about that way, and I apologize for that. But a community consensus did develop and what you see here is a bike bridge being built. It's under construction today that connects a farm that was purchased by the Vermont Land Trust, the old Scott Farm, now known as the Bluffside Farm. There's 2 miles of frontage on Lake Memphremagog that the public is going to have access to. The bridge will connect to downtown Newport. And at the far end of the farm, there's a rail trail that takes you all the way to Canada. And I think the hope is once the border reopens, Canadians will be biking through there, and we'll be biking through there. And it will connect, provides a great recreation resource and connect to downtown Newport that will be very helpful. The other thing we did with a program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which is not funded by the capital budget, but we helped them, in addition to providing $200,000, secure grants to help build the bridge. And I'll talk about that more broadly in a moment. Denise, if you could advance to the next slide.
Just a quick question, Gus. The Canadian trails, where they're going to be connecting to the American trails, is there some immigration station close by?
I don't know that I can't remember the details of that, but I will check and get back to you. But I it looks like Senator Engels has an answer to that question.
It's not. It's close. It's probably within a mile of where the trail crosses into Canada, Senator Benning.
Okay.
And just commenting on the project on the old Scott farm, now the Bluffside farm, it sits across from me on the lake. I look at it every day, and it's caused a lot of excitement up here, and it's a beautiful project. It is. It's something that has added a lot of pride into the community. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think even more important, became a point of unity for a community that was really just struggling after the EB5 problem. So anything that, this is a place where I just really appreciate the governor. Anything that we can do that helps rally unity is a good thing. And this next slide speaks to that as well. And Senator Benning,
The hole in the ground up there, though, Gus, is for public relations purposes is being renamed as the Downtown Newport Community Pool.
okay, good. So Senator Benning, I'm sure you know that St. Johnsbury went through quite a while where municipal government had a lot of strife. At the same time, this building was, which is the old, known as Depot Square locally, had an out-of-state owner. He'd owned another property that we helped buy him out of back in 2008 down in Windsor. And this building was just, the commercial space has been vacant for most of the last 20 years. A real drag on the downtown, probably the most important building in the downtown. The upper apartments were a rabbit warren of very, very small, I think 48 units. What's happening here?
Part of that, though, Gus, was a large portion of my criminal clientele, unfortunately.
Then you know the building and its occupants well.
I do.
And I know there's still some issues in the Republican bloc next door. What's happening here is that the Kingdom Development Corporation has bought the first floor commercial space as a condominium, and they'll take responsibility for finding tenants for it, but they are the owners of it. The upper floors are being redeveloped with a smaller footprint of 40 apartments by a group called Evernorth and the local housing organization Rural Edge. Construction is well underway, but this was the other place that this special allocation for the Northeast Kingdom was dedicated. And Paul Costello and the Council on Rural Development had done a community visit in St. Johnsbury as I think after there'd been strife, and then finally there was a municipal election, and the select board changed dramatically. And the residents of St. Johnsbury who participated in that community visit identified the redevelopment of this property as their number one community development priority. So it's well underway. It should reopen as housing next fall. And we're really happy to have been able to be of assistance to this. And we're hoping that Kingdom Development will have good luck in finding the commercial tenants. I know that any retail in downtown in this COVID world is going to be difficult, but that's what we're up to here. And again, would not have happened without a capital bill appropriation. Let's move on to the next slide. I mentioned the Rural Economic Development Initiative. Doesn't come from your budget, but I think it's important for those of you who represent rural communities to know that this is something Senator Starr invented. We have spent $75,000 a year providing grant writing assistance to towns under 5,000 or businesses in them, and so far generated $4.4 million in federal, state, and philanthropic funding. So among the projects that are underway or have already opened is Runamuck Maple, who is now in the old Scrabble factory in Fairfield, provided some help to get grants for reopening this store in Albany. And we also developed a fundraising plan, and they're still working on it, but I know they got $1 million grant last year to redevelop the Yellow Barn site in Hardwick. So all kinds of good stuff has happened with a very small amount of money. And your colleagues in the Appropriations Committee actually increased the appropriation last year to $100,000. So we're looking forward to doing more work in our small towns to spur the economy. That's been a priority of the governor's as well. Let's move on to the next slide. COVID response and recovery has also been a part of our work. And the legislature gave us a lot of money to convert buildings to housing and to assist homeless shelters all over the state. And that has happened, and almost all of it happened by the December 30th deadline. We now have an extension, but almost all the money that was allocated to us has been well used. The other thing we were involved in was using our farm and forest viability program to provide aid to the farm and food and forestry community. And more than 500 enterprises got our help. About 100 were businesses that needed to pivot. They lost markets from sales to restaurants. They needed strategies to do direct sales and that sort of thing. The other 400 or so businesses needed help navigating the various grant programs that were available through the CRF. And so we're happy to have done that work. The longer the pandemic continues, I think the more need. The Agency of Agriculture told your colleagues in the Appropriations Committee last week that they hope that there'll be a way for the viability program to get more resources. I think one of the things the pandemic pointed out is that there's still lots of farm businesses that need help just modernizing their accounting systems and understanding their cash flow and where they are financially. So we appreciate their support and look forward to doing more of that kind of work. Let's move on. Just as you think of, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the statute tells us that economic vitality is a part of our mission. I think what Tom Cavett, the legislature's economist, would tell you is when you're looking to pull out of a recession, nothing has the economic multiplier the way construction of homes has an economic multiplier. It's really significant, and it's not just the construction jobs that have an impact. And when you think about doing that work in downtowns and village centers, the impact can be even more dramatic. Let's keep moving along. Denise, thank you. So we're going to finish up just with this photograph, which I think reflects why so many of us love to live in Vermont. This is 5,000 acres in Westmore, and Senator Mazza, you may recall back in 1988, Governor Kunin thought she had a deal to purchase this land. And at the very last moment, somebody from New Jersey bought it. And 30 years later, so about 3 years ago, we were able to buy a conservation easement. Half of Long Pond, all of Mud Pond are conserved. It'll have water quality benefits. There's about 5 miles of active trails on this property, providing public access. And it's another piece of our work through the capital bill that has just been, I think, creates long-term value for Vermonters. When you think about the bonds being paid off in 20 years, 50 years from now, people will be enjoying hiking on this property. So with that, I'm happy to stop and answer your questions. And both Jen and I are available to the committee at any moment to address the needs of your constituents.
So let me say first, Senator Ingalls, you're not used to this routine yet, but we get dozens of reports from various agencies. And this report has been snail mailed to all of us. My copy came today, so you should be getting something shortly. The upshot is you may want to hang on to it for reference in every other report that we get. I do ask Denise to keep a copy of all the reports. Right now, I haven't the foggiest idea where she'd be doing that because we're not in the building. But just keep in mind that these reports are available will be sent to you, and technically we all should have some knowledge of what's contained therein when people come to ask us about them. Senator Parrott, you had a question.
Yeah, so it's I represent one of the few corners of the state of Vermont that's really growing, and one of the concerns that's come up with a few municipalities that I represent is how much land's actually going into conservation, how much of it is prime, land to develop housing, and I get this is probably a different conversation you have, but how much work are you guys working with certain municipalities? Like I think of like Georgia, St. Albans Town, Swanton, where St. Albans Town and Swanton have almost 30% of their developable land in conservation. Working with them to identify corridors that they want to see housing growth in, but so still meeting conservation needs, but also respecting the need that to have affordable housing in these communities, they have to be able to build homes.
That's a great question. So our general approach is one that whenever we get an application, we look at what does the town plan say. We ask applicants whether there's an opinion from the town about whether conservation is consistent with the town plan and the regional plan or not. There have been a few instances where we have actually said no to a conservation deal because the municipality had other plans for the land, or I can think some years ago of a farm in Bridport where we said we're not going to include 20 acres adjacent to the village in this conservation easement. You can continue to farm it if you want, but because it was adjacent to the village, we said that's not the appropriate place to conserve. So I hope that in our process, we're listening to communities on that issue. We absolutely encourage communities to identify where they want to grow and how they want to grow. I think state policy has been about compact settlements surrounded by a working landscape, but there needs to be room for our current villages to grow. We've always worked on the basis of a willing buyer, willing seller sort of an approach as an alternative to the regulatory system. So I see that as how we fit in. And clearly, when you get up to 30 or 40% of a community's land base in conservation, you have a different discussion than when it's the first or second farm to be conserved.
Yep. No, so for example, I am now employed by the town of St. Albans, but we had an example of a farm before I came on board going to conservation that there's a half a mile public road that is now conserved on both sides that only serves the farm that can never be developed. So it wasn't you guys who did it was the land trust, but we were just looking at issues like that where we're like, the community's like, well, what do we do with this public road now? It's just a long driveway to this one particular location.
So that's a problem. And I think there's two things that I would say to you, Senator. The Senate a few years ago passed an easement amendment bill that died in the House. There was a fair amount of controversy about it. And I think at some point we're going to have to revisit that because perpetuity is a long time and none of our vision is 2020 on what the future will bring. The second thing, and this may be the sort of thing that no municipal or state official wants to ever deal with, is the other solution if we've made the wrong decisions around conservation is condemnation. So the holders of an easement cannot give it up, especially if it's governed by the IRS, but condemnation is a process that's available. It may not be one that you want to use. My wife was on the school board when condemnation was sought to get the school a site for a new septic system, and they ended up not going that route. You can imagine how controversial that was, but it is a remedy that is available if we've made a wrong decision, and it would obviously take a strong community consensus to use that as a way to deal with that as a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I understand you live in Calais?
I do.
Do you take Route 2?
I take Route 14.
Okay. I would imagine, though, you are familiar with that huge barn on Route 2 that's sort of on the Marshfield, Plainfield town line.
Yeah, the old Orton barn.
Yeah, now, since I started talking about this, that half of the roof has now collapsed officially. And that barn is, I think, bigger than the yellow barn in Hardwick, which you had a picture of. Has anybody approached you to try to do something to conserve that?
No is the short answer. Not that barn in particular. One of the members of our board is Emily Wadhams, who was once the state's historic preservation officer for several different administrations. There is a small program the state has to assist barns, and I think one of the things she would love to see is for that program to be enlarged, because there are barns that are architectural gems that are at risk all over the state. And they may not be usable for modern agricultural practices, but they have an aesthetic merit that some people care about. And I think thinking through how they can be redeveloped and reused is a good thing for the state. But no, we haven't been approached about that barn in particular.
So this particular barn, being literally feet from Route 2, is going to collapse on Route 2 at some point in the not too distant future, the way I'm looking at the building falling down. And so there is a major safety concern there, as well as the aesthetic and historic image that it presents. I'm trying to figure out a way to get some help there, and I don't know how to do that. Is there some legislation that could be created to enable that to happen?
Well,
Start one, you start them all.
Well, there's a big difference between a barn that's 100 feet away from the road, but this is literally like 25 feet from the road.
Well, who's the owner?
I don't know the answer.
That's what I'm saying. The owner's got to step up too.
yeah, I mean, it seems to me that if it is a hazard, and I haven't been down Route 2 in a while, and we're all driving less than we used to, but I did last see a big hole in the barn the last time I was on that road. The municipality certainly could be discussing with the owner the need to make repairs and keep it safe. And I guess I'm happy to do some thinking and get back to you about, what do we do about the hazards? I think a different approach would be a more proactive one of having a larger grants program to help people fix their barns than the one that is currently administered by the Division for Historic Preservation, which provides a very small amount of assistance. But as I'm thinking about that lot, there's almost no parking there. So the redevelopment of that site is really a tough one. But I think your larger question of how do we deal with a hazard is worth more thinking, and I just don't have a quick answer for you today.
Well, if you happen to be driving down Route 2, take a look up, because it's much worse than a hole right now. It's essentially that whole section of roof is gone and collapsed in the building. But if you happen to do some more thinking on it, I'd love to hear back from you to see if we can't figure out a way to take care of that.
Okay, we will do that.
Jen, did you have anything else you wanted to continue on with?
A couple thoughts actually, and that is Gus showed you a picture of our board and mentioned that some of them the board members are appointed by the legislature. There's actually one member whose term expires next week, and it's a position that's appointed by the Senate Committee on Committees. So Senator Mazza and his colleagues on the committee will get an inquiry from us, probably through the Pro Tem's office, around actually reappointing the person to that position, because it's been working really well.
They have reapplied.
Yeah.
They've indicated their desire, yeah. So I think now that she's settled in, I think my thought would be to contact Carolyn Wesley.
Yes.
And get you
Contact
the
Carolyn.
information.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Does that sound like and then I guess, Mr. Chair, the other thing I might mention is that the Newport and the St. Johnsbury projects were specific allocations for the Northeast Kingdom a number of years ago, but there was a particular and I think pretty unique consensus in the legislature that due to the EB5 and the state's role in that there was a broad desire to help those communities in the kingdom in that way. But since I've been watching the capital bill, it's not typical for there to be specific funding to specific projects very often. So VHCB gets a general allocation, and then communities apply to us and they go to our public board, and then they decide which applications to fund and which ones not to. But I didn't want to leave the committee with the impression that that's something we typically seek or see or support. It's generally not the way it works, and that was an unusual circumstance that I think has worked out really well.
Well, that Senator Kitchell is pretty sneaky about how she gets things in the right place at the right time. That's why she gets more votes than I do every year. So
You're doing damn good at it.
working on it. All right, committee, any other questions, comments, or thoughts? If not, thank you very much for coming by, guys.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be seeing you again, I'm sure.
Okay. Take care, everyone. And look forward to getting to know you, Senator Ingles.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Committee, for today's purposes, that's all I had. And tomorrow, we're going to be meeting with the Department of Corrections. So if there are issues that you want to talk about in that regard, think about some questions we can pepper them with.
What's the issue with the corrections? Not
Well, first we're going to do some basic introductions. There was a report from Downs, Racklin, and Martin, which you should have in your snail mail by now. I don't know how deep we're going to get into that. We're going to be meeting with Commissioner Baker as well as Secretary Mike Smith. So I guess the conversation could be wide open, but we're going to start with basic introductions. And then if there are more immediate concerns, we can have a chat with them. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. See you tomorrow. Denise,
Thanks.
can you stay on the line with me?